Happy Easter. You're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. Do you know what Passover is all about? You know what it means to the Jews? I want to talk to you a little bit about why this Passover especially grows out of an article from prophecynewswatch.com. But the article starts out by saying announcing Passover on the Temple Mount. Passover has not been celebrated on the Temple Mount for 1,000 years or 2,000 years. It's coming back around again. In the article, Passover references the idea of the Pesach, Jewish word. This month that it occurs is called Nisan. A lot of Jewish terminology here. But Passover is a major Jewish holiday and one of the most widely celebrated Jewish holidays. The full dress reenactment has taken place for the past 9 years, drawing large crowds of the devoted. But this year the request was to hold the event on the Temple Mount. It was denied due to health ministry restrictions. But together, the Shabbat and the Sukkot, as they're called, were to be put together here. Passover, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. At this time, the entire population of the Kingdom of Judah made a pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. Samaritans still make this pilgrimage to Mount Gerizim, but only men participate in public worship. The Passover commences on the 15th day of the Hebrew month Nisan. This year, that's April 8th. It occurred at sundown last week, ending on April 16th at sundown. And it lasts for either 7 days in Israel and for Reformed Jews and other progressive Jews around the world who adhere to biblical commandment, or 8 days for the Orthodox, the Hasidic, and most conservative Jews, at least those in the diaspora, when Jews were scattered around the world. The rituals unique to Passover celebrations commence with the Passover Seder. It starts on the 15th of Nisan. Now, Jewish months begin and end in the middle of our calendar month. So the 15th would actually be the first day. The Sanhedrin, literally the tribunal from the Greek word for assembly. The Sanhedrin tasked Shimshon Eboim, head of the Temple Mount organization, with submitting a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu to perform the ritual Korban Pesach. Literally something which draws close, in this case the Passover sacrifice, to perform the ritual in its proper place, meaning the Temple Mount, and in its biblically mandated time, which would have been Wednesday afternoon, the eve of the Passover feast. The letter read, quote, "God forbid we should allow the coronavirus to strike his children with rising up to bring about the solution given in the Torah for epidemics." The request comes in the wake of the government's rejecting of requests to perform a reenactment of the Korban, the sacrifice to God, the vow, Pesach, or Passover. The full dress reenactment has taken place for the past 9 years, drawing large crowds of the devoted, but this year the request was to hold it on the Temple Mount, which was denied. Health ministry kinds of things. He noted that the original Passover sacrifice offered in Egypt on the night before the Exodus was intended to stop the final plague, which was described as the Negev, a disease. The death angel, as you remember, would pass over any house where the blood was on the doorposts or the lintel. In addition, later on, King David purchased the Temple Mount and built an altar and offered a sacrifice to stop a plague. the letter that was written this year says, quote, God forbid we should allow the coronavirus to strike his children with rising up to bring about the solution given in the Torah for epidemics, end of quote. In past years, there have been requests to perform the ceremony in that proper place and at that proper time. Elohim told Breaking News Israel that, quote, usually this type of request is just rejected out of hand. However, he said, we were pleasantly surprised when we were informed that the request was forwarded to Erdan, the internal security minister in charge of what happens on the Temple Mount. So, even if the request is denied, he said, the non-rejection signals a change of heart for the prime minister, who stated a month ago that he rejected an agreement with the right-wing Otzma Yehudit party that would have permitted Jews to pray on the Temple Mount. Netanyahu has admitted that he preferred to lose the election rather than give his permission to Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. This non-rejection is interpreted as Netanyahu having a change of heart about the renewal of Torah rituals. The Hebrew language ultra-Orthodox news site Kikar Shabbat reported that Haredi organization named Torat HaKedu, I'm getting into this Hebrew thing, is now calling for the renewal of the Korban, the sacrifice to God, the vow that's called Pesach. That as a solution for the coronavirus. In addition to permission to perform the ritual on the Temple Mount, Elohim filed for permits to transport the altar from where it is being stored in Elkanah in Samaria to Jerusalem. The Passover sacrifice can only be offered in one place, and that's on the Temple Mount. It requires an altar to be built in order to adhere to the biblical requirements, and such an altar was constructed last year and is standing by. It's at the ready. The square altar of 9 feet square and 5 feet high is constructed of aerated concrete. The materials was ruled to be fit for use in the temple. In the Talmud, it is explained that steel may not be used to cut the stones of the altar, since the temple service brings life into the world, and steel, as it is used in war, takes life. However, its use for transportation is permitted. The intent was to create an altar that could be taken to the Temple Mount at a moment's notice should the need arise. The Pesach offering has special significance, as there are only 2 mitzvahs, the biblical commandments, for which non-compliance receives the most severe punishment mandated by the Torah. It requires the karat being cut off from the community, what we would call excommunication, with the bri malah, circumcision, and the korban, sacrifice to God, a vow, Pesach. All of the elements stand ready. The vessels have been prepared and need only to be immersed in a ritual bath to be purified. The Kohanim, the Jewish men descended from Aaron the priest, are registered for service, and their biblically mandated clothes are ready. Wine and oil prepared to the strictest requirements are at the ready. A red heifer is being raised. However, lacking one, the halacha, the Torah law, permits time-bound public sacrifices like the Korban Pesach, as well as the Korban vow, sacrifice, Tamid, twice daily offering to be brought with impurity. Technical stuff. The Sanhedrin recently performed an intense study concerning the current status of the Passover offering and concluded that at this juncture, one sacrifice made at the Temple Mount, brought in the name of the entire Jewish people, would suffice. In a letter to Netanyahu, the organizations emphasized that they were requesting the government enforce equal freedom to all religions on the Temple Mount as legislated by Israeli and international law. Muslims are currently afforded free and unlimited access to the Temple Mount. Small groups of Jews are only permitted to enter the compound during restricted hours, They can only come through one gate, and only after rigorous background and security checks. Once in the compound, Jews must follow a set route, and are only permitted to stand in place for a few minutes at a time. They're scared to death they're going to stand there and pray. Jews are not permitted to eat or to drink, and the water fountains at the site are for the exclusive use of Muslims. Finally, the Sanhedrin emphasized that the plan to bring the altar to the Temple Mount was entirely consistent with President Trump's recently released Deal of the Century, which recognized Israel's full sovereignty over the site, saying, quote, "People of every faith should be permitted to pray on the Temple Mount in a manner that is fully respectful to their religion, taking into account the times of each religion's prayers and holidays, as well as other religious factors." Acknowledging the president's role in helping the Jewish people move toward renewing the temple, Rabbi Dov Stein wrote him a letter last month asking for his intervention in allowing the Korban, the sacrifice of God, the vow, Pesach, Passover, to take place for the sake of the healing of the world. No matter what the response from the Israeli government, a lamb has already been acquired for the sacrifice and now stands ready, he said. It didn't happen, but one day it will. And when it does, you know what's going to break out. It's not going to be pretty. Pray for the peace of Israel.